Leaders Talk, the interview podcast portraying leaders who are committed to better leadership, better organizations, and a better world. Powered by Leadership Choices.
Welcome to Leaders Talk, the biographic interview podcast for better leadership, better organizations, and a better world. My name is Karsten Drath, and I'm one of the managing partners of Leadership Choices. My guest today is a very, very interesting person, and I'm looking very much forward to this interview with her. Zoe Cohen is a coach, a consultant, used to be a senior manager in the NHS in the United Kingdom, and is now a climate and social activist, and is working with Extinction Rebellion in the UK. She's one of the spokesperson of Extinction Rebellion UK, XR, for those who know the organization. And she will walk us through her life story and how she developed from being a manager into being a coach/consultant, then to become a climate activist, kind of leaving also a lot of conventions of our life, of business life, kind of behind her. So very interesting conversation. And we had her as part of our panel at the Open University, November 4. And I think everybody was like struck with awe listening to her, also a bit, depressed sometimes, because she very much, puts things into a very big context and is very outspoken about the analysis of researchers, the data that we have. And if you put that all together, that it really, you come to the conclusion that the status quo is no option. And the question is, are we able as a species to kind of trigger these changes that we need in order to turn this crisis around? So this is the conversation with Zoe, and we're jumping right into it. And I'm very much looking forward to your thoughts. If you want to share them with me, drop me a line, karsten.drath@leadership-choices.com. Looking forward to your thoughts. And now, right into the conversation with Zoe. A very warm welcome to Zoe Cohen. I find it always hard to describe a person, but with Zoe, I find it especially hard. Zoe has been in senior managerial roles. She is a coach, and she is also a climate and social activist, amongst others with Extinction Rebellion. Zoe, welcome to Leaders Talk.
Hi, Karsten. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Zoe, how would you describe yourself?
Well, you always start with the hard questions, don't you?
I didn't start with purpose of life.
Well, obviously, with my coach hat on, and I know full well that we all have multiple identities. So, what am I? I'm a human, a woman, a mum. I have been a daughter. I guess I still am a daughter. I'm an auntie. I'm a cousin. I am an activist. I'm a coach. I'm a business owner. I'm a politically active citizen. What else am I? I aspire to be a truth speaker, whatever that means.
A truth speaker. Okay, that's a great topic for today. Okay, Zoe. So maybe, let's get some elephants out of the room, or into the room, actually. First of all, because before we can let them out of the room. So, Extinction Rebellion. Not everybody knows what that is. You're also, I think, active for Insulate Britain. So maybe tell us a little bit about your activism, what you do there, and why you do it.
Okay, Extinction Rebellion, for those people who aren't aware, is a social movement. It's we are a grassroots civil disobedience movement using non-violent direct action, and we exist to demand and push our government. I say our government because Extinction Rebellion was created or formed in the United Kingdom, but does exist in well over 70 countries now. It's kind of pretty much global movement. But here in the UK, our demands are that the government and associated institutions tell the truth about the climate and ecological emergency that we're in, as in the real truth, and that they act now and get to zero carbon emissions by 2025 and halt biodiversity harm, etc. And the third demand is for a legally binding citizens' assembly to steer the government through what needs to happen and how it needs to happen, so that citizens are fully and properly, transparently engaged, and we have an upgraded democracy. So that's kind of what we're about, and we aim to achieve our demands through, as I said, peaceful, non-violent, direct action. So we're not a campaign, we're a movement, and explicitly are in rebellion against our government, which sounds like a really weird thing to say. Every time I say it, it sounds kind of jarring with kind of everyday life, because everyday life you go around your business and you don't talk about being in rebellion against your government, but because our government, not just our government, many, if not pretty much every government, is failing in their primary duty to keep their citizens safe from the existential crisis that we face, then it's kind of our duty as citizens to step up and be in active rebellion against that.
And I think being a social activist is maybe one kind of label to put on it, but I think in your case, or in the case of Extinction Rebellion, I think that there's almost like a perception that XR for short is known for its very visual, also activities that disturb the public process, let's say. I mean, blocking the M25, the lifeline of London, for example, or, you know, protesting against HSBC, smashing some windows. That is something that brings you into the news, into BBC, into Sky News, and it's a lot about the question is, why are you doing this? Why are you so forceful? Why are you not just protesting? What's your answer to this? I mean, like protesting like others, like marching the streets, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because those things don't work.
Okay.
I mean,
answer.
they don't. That's and just to differentiate for people listening, is in terms of blocking the M25 and the circular motorway around London, that's been actions that have been taken by Insulate Britain, which is separate from Extinction Rebellion. Some of the same people are involved, but it is actually a separate movement. So just to discern that. But I mean, doing stuff like all the polite, non-disruptive stuff rarely achieves anything. Like, you know, for really specific, precise, limited changes, petitions, marches, traditional campaigning can achieve some stuff in some cases, but what we're talking about here is a whole-scale transformation. You know, and there is so many people and so many organizations from the UN to Prince Charles to people at the heart of the World Economic Forum, through to activists and all sorts of people in between, and commentators saying like how much, whether you call it system change or transformation or complete shift in consciousness, or, you know, there are so many different ways of explaining or talking about the scale of the shift that we need, and it's way beyond anything one can petition for or march for. And let's face it, you know, lots of big marches have happened before. Like in this country, obviously, quite some years ago, we had a huge march with multiple millions of people. I think it might have been a couple of million. I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head right now, but marching against the war in Iraq, and that made no difference. Whereas, unfortunately, the situation is such that our democratic processes and structures are pretty broken, and, you know, I'm 51 and I've made sure that I voted in every election since I was 18, because, you know, that's the right thing to do, and I knew from being a young girl that women had, the suffragettes had done an awful lot to fight for the vote, so we should blooming well vote and use that right. But there's never been a box to tick or a box to cross on the ballot box that has said, stop destroying the biosphere, or live within if you want to live within planetary boundaries and have a long-term future on Earth, tick this box. That's never been an option. Right. There is that, every box has been that one could tick pretty much, with possibly the exception of the Green Party to a degree, but then the Green Party have no power within the structures and ability to get any power within the structures in this country or many countries. There's no way of actually voting for the level of systemic change that we've needed. So alas, with a very heavy heart, ordinary people have to cause disruption to get attention, to get the media to then put pressure on the government.
Okay. And I think the first part of the line of argumentation is we are living in a way, especially the global north, which is, I think, the term that you use, or not you, but that also researchers use for the, let's say, first world countries, industrialized countries, large GDPs that consume a lot of natural resources, that emit a lot of CO2 and other gases that pollute the atmosphere, and at the end kind of deplete the resources that are available for the entirety of mankind, especially in the global south as well. I think let's not even discuss that. That's a tick in the box. At least for me, that's totally clear. The question is what to do about it, right? And I think what I hear you say is our democratic system is too much a choice between A or B, whilst A or B is both not good enough for the level of change that we have to do. So it's a bit more, is it more towards basis democracy? So like referendums, asking the people, having them getting them more of a say in the global policy making process?
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure whether you're asking me about that asking me that in the context of Extinction Rebellion or generally, but I'm going to answer both if that's all right.
That's right.
So Extinction Rebellion's third demand is about citizens' assemblies, and the demand for there to be a legally binding citizens' assembly. Now, and citizens' assemblies are getting a little bit more awareness publicly, but there's still pretty low level of awareness, I think, about what they are and why they are and so on. Essentially, the idea of citizens' assemblies, I believe, goes back to the kind of Greek times and Athenian democracy and so forth. The model, although I'm not going to go into that because I don't know a lot about it back then, but it's not a totally new idea. But then the modern sort of versions of citizens' assemblies have been used across various countries in the world, and a well-known example in this country is in Ireland around the abortion debate, where it was too hot to handle for politicians, so they created a citizens' assembly, and there's several core aspects of a citizens' assembly. One is that it's in an ideal world, it should be constituted so that it's independent of the body that created it. So it's got real kind of transparency in that sense. And by definition, citizens' assemblies are created by a process called sortition, which is like a lottery, like the same sort of process that's used to select juries for people for jury service in this country, and I'm sure elsewhere. So it is a random stratified sample. So every citizens' assembly, if it's say 200 people or whatever, it's automatically 50% women. It's the right representative proportion of different ethnic groups, of different wealth strata in society, for example, and whatever other characteristics are important. And so you've got a genuinely representative group of people, and you have a genuinely deliberative process. So it's not the kind of oppositional shouting matches that happen in Westminster and in the Houses of Parliament. It's just in House of Commons you just get this awful oppositional shouting across the divide and this bluster and the blah 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 and the you're going to have more genuine adult conversation, and people are, you can have training if because many people aren't used to deliberative processes, and so we can have training about that, and have really good facilitation to help people talk and really build respect and build shared knowledge, and hear from a genuinely wide range of sources of evidence from the scientific experts through to Indigenous peoples with lived experience and so on, and deliberate on that full complexity and come out with considered responses and considered proposals that the evidence shows, again, citizens' assemblies, I believe that citizens, when going through that kind of process, will often come out with much more courageous and progressive proposals than the politicians will. Because the politicians are, well, even if I say it charitably, they're in that space of, I know the right thing to do, but I don't know how to get elected doing it, or that, that expression. And that's me being charitable about a lot of them, particularly in this country. But the people, we the people, can think long term, and if given the right, the full scope of information, would generally want, I do believe people want to do the right thing when people are, I don't mean the right as in there is a single right thing, but I mean when presented with a really good range of evidence from different sources and having opportunity to deliberate with people with different views, people can come out with some really, really sound and more ambitious proposals than governments will do. And so I think I'm saying that from a perspective, that's the kind of some of the information behind the third demand for Extinction Rebellion. What's also really important is that our parliamentary timetables and things work on, electoral timetables rather, they work on 4 or 5 years, don't they? And governments might think a couple of years ahead, and then they're soon in election mode, so they're just so short term. But we need to think generations ahead, don't we? We talk about in some Indigenous peoples, imagine thinking 7 generations ahead, and just thinking on a whole different timescale. And we need to think about being good ancestors, and we need to understand planetary processes and not short-term politics. So we need to be thinking, 20, 30, 100 years ahead, and making decisions in that vein. And citizens can do that. Politicians struggle to.
Right, because the element of power, re-election, staying in power comes into the way. Now, a country that is known for more basic democracy is Switzerland in Europe. They have all kinds of referendums each year. I think it's probably, like 10 or 20, some major ones, some smaller ones. Now, they are not necessarily known to be super ecological as a country, meaning basis democracy as such doesn't necessarily translate into the right development, and also not into quicker developments maybe. So I think a bit of education along the way is probably important, which I think is the role of the General Assemblies, that they have presented all the relevant research, the facts, also maybe the contradicting facts. It's oftentimes not so easy, right? Is that the thought?
Yes, I mean, I think, and if only humanity was simple and straightforward, yeah. It's like the truth is very messy, isn't it? And making progress is a messy thing. And as much as my inner child might like it to be linear and simplistic, it just isn't, is it? And yeah, so the context for the deliberation is super important, isn't it? And influential. Everything from the bigger political zeitgeist to the kind of ecological context to the media, all of the things that influence those things. So the nature of the media, and obviously the social media and the algorithms on Facebook, and all of the myriad of different things impact on how people will vote and those kind of things. I mean, I think referendums are one thing. They're quite a blunt instrument, aren't they? As we've seen in this country in recent years, they're a pretty blunt instrument. Whereas a citizens' assembly is much more nuanced and deliberative, and actually allows, obviously, at the end of the day, recommendations need to be voted on, but you do that with a genuine deliberation, and one can sort of. I think I just want to highlight here that something that I feel very drawn to and enthusiastic about at the moment is the Global Assembly that's happening as we speak. They're in about halfway through, and I find it's one of those things where you start talking about it and you think, yeah, wow, why haven't we ever had this before? So that the idea of actually having a properly representative group of citizens across the earth to deliberate on the most important issues of our time, it's kind of, you think, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Why haven't we got that built into our global governance systems? But we haven't. And the Global Assembly that has been prototyped this year with 100 people chosen by sortition from 100 points on Earth, which is pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. And there is a lady from Germany in there. I've seen her speak on one of the events. They had a presentation at the first day of COP, which was the first time we've done a sort of interim presentation, and they had a few people from the assembly speaking themselves. A gentleman from Thailand, a lady from India, a guy from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and a lady from Germany, a lady from China as well. And that was amazing. It's kind of it brings out goose pimples, if that makes sense. It translates well, because sort of gives one spine tingling moment actually listening to a cross section of ordinary people, like real ordinary people who from those countries, speaking about their experience of working in this way with people that they would have had no opportunity to ever interact with before. And it's really, I find it really humbling and genuinely inspiring, that the Global Assembly and the possibility of actually hearing the voice of humanity for the first time ever, the real voice of humanity, not Davos or, billionaires who I'm utterly sick of hearing of, but the real voice of humanity is just, it's beautiful. And I just hope, it's prototyped this year with 100 people. It's due to come out with its full report in March next year. And the question it's been deliberating on, because we know as coaches that the human mind works best in the presence of a question, doesn't it? And that's how citizens' assemblies work. They have a question to deliberate on. And the question that the Global Assembly has been deliberating on is, how can humanity address the climate and ecological crisis fairly and effectively? It's a very, simple, clear, not simple, clear question. It's a big question, but it's a very clearly worded question. So, and
so is that this Global Assembly, is that organized by Extinction Rebellion or by the United Nations?
Good question. Good, super question. I should have been clear about that. Thank you, Karsten. So no, I've segued from citizens' assemblies in the UK and XR's demands to the Global Assembly, and I should have been clear about that. So no, that it's completely separate. So I guess a couple of things to say there. One is that, it's kind of, I think that Extinction Rebellion and the founders of Extinction Rebellion were ahead of their time, in lots of ways, but certainly ahead of their time in terms of recognizing the need for and calling for deliberative democracy, because of the scale and level of the existential threats we face are beyond party politics, way beyond party politics. So, and this Global Assembly is completely separate from both the UN and anything like Extinction Rebellion or any activist group. So it's been set up and funded in a sort of completely independent, transparent way. It's not funded by governments or corporations. It's funded by sort of independent funders and personal donations, etc. And those donors have no way of influencing the content of the assembly at all. It's completely at a distance, if you like. So it's not like political lobbying, which is paying for decisions right, left, and centre in this country and elsewhere. It is genuinely not lobbyable, which is super important, and it's also not. It's got very transparent governance, which you can look up on their website, which is just globalassembly.org, and there it has sort of governance bodies which are really transparent and diverse, and again are sort of not coming from a particular lobby or a particular NGO. So yeah, it's separate and independent and transparent, and yet supported by, you know, really beginning to be supported by a wide range of people, from people at the UN, so Antonio Guterres, Nigel Topping, Alok Sharma are all speaking out saying they think the Global Assembly is a good thing, which is, you know, really positive. And I'm involved in a group called Leaders for Global Assemblies, which is a diverse group of leaders from across a whole range of sectors: business, academia, media, fashion, finance, and more, healthcare and beyond, who are saying, actually, this system isn't working. You know, that the system, the idea that the tiny minority of people who have control over the current systems might be able to steer us out of this is wrong, and it's unjust, and it's unfair. And if we're going to steer ourselves into the next phase of, you know, humanity, next phase of human history, we need to do that in a just, fair and transparent way, and that global citizens' assemblies, like the Global Assembly being prototyped right now, are a really key part of that, and they need to be a part of global governance. So I'm really proud to be one of an increasing number of leaders calling for that shift.
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
So we'll link that in the show notes for people to look up, because I think it's not very well known here. I'm just learning this from you, and I think it makes tons of sense, because I was always asking myself, okay, I get this, there's radical change needed, and I feel it too. But the question is, how do you do this whilst, you know, living up to humanity and you know, equal rights and social justice? I mean, a very effective way would be an eco-dictatorship, right? To say, we change the system, throw it all over, put a good dictator on top, and we save the planet. Probably effective, but then that's not what we, you know, it's probably not very, I don't know, it's not the right, it doesn't sound like the right thing to do. It just sounds wrong.
No, and we may not want to go in this direction, but there's obviously rightly a lot of concerns about eco-fascism, right? And you know, I saw a really shocking, well, it shocked me, even though I know about it, but it was the depth of it was just shocking. I saw an article recently about I think it was the G20 states, G20 countries, and how much more they spend on border security and border control than they do on climate action. And it's shocking. Like Canada, I think, was spending 15 times more on border security and border control than it is on climate action. And even here in the UK, where we claim we're a world leader, we're spending twice as much on our border security, etc., than we are on climate action. And, you know, it's like the one of the expressions from the suffragettes is deeds, not words. You know, so look at what people and governments and corporations are actually doing, not what they're saying. So that, you know.
You mentioned suffragettes. Not everybody knows who the suffragettes were. Maybe you can say 2 sentences about them.
Yeah, okay. So the suffragettes were a group of women who used different direct action strategies to play a key role in getting women the vote in this country over 100 years ago.
Okay, yeah. And also, I think in other countries, right?
I'm sure, yeah, there were other movements. Yes, there were other movements in other countries. Apologies, yeah, there were other movements in other countries. But I guess I know a bit more about the UK. So apologies for being not globally informed on that. But yeah, and obviously there have been.
It's a French name, so hence I was guessing it is probably French as well.
There've been suffrage movements and in many parts of the world. But yeah, I was thinking particularly about the UK suffragettes and how they did a whole range of things, including breaking windows and to bring attention to what they were demanding.
And Zoe, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the key point is, and you have been kindly speaking at one of our conferences the other week, where a lot of the panelists, a lot of the spectators, not spectators, the people in the audience, they left, I think, shaken and sometimes mildly depressed, I would say, and the reason being that part of, if you put one and one together, these relatively simple outcome of that thinking process is that we cannot sustain our standard of living if we are going to sustain mankind, in a long run. I mean, at the end of the day, it boils down to that. And we all know that it's super simple to say, okay, I don't use this plastic bag, but standard of living, I mean, that's a different thing, right? That is really getting to the core of people, where people also tend to get defensive. And I think you speaking about that, Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for Future, speaking about that, shouting about that sometimes, for people kind of creates a defense mechanism of saying, yes, I like you. I think you're right. It's admirable. Don't smash glass. And on the other hand, I also don't want to lose my standard of living. What's your thinking on that?
Wow, it's a brilliant question. I've probably got about an hour's worth of response to that. I'll try and be succinct. And I guess my inner voice is speaking to me throughout this conversation, Karsten, and partly it's saying, who the hell are you to say any of this, Zoe? I mean, I'm just one person muddling my way through, trying to do my best. So in that context, I think there's probably at least three things to say. There's something about identity, there's something about fear, there's something about, there's lots of things. So I think there's, I'll just say what I went, some of what I went through, and I'm sure I'm still going through, because I don't think it necessarily ever ends, is sort of, going through layers of working through different layers of denial and collusion with oneself and the system that we're in and what we've been told and socialized in for most, if not all, of our lives, and working through that and coming to the painful conclusion that much of it is a total lie. That this sort of fabrication, it's almost, I'm guessing, I don't know if you've ever seen The Truman Show, the film. Yeah, and hopefully some people listening have seen The Truman Show. The guy's kind of literally from baby is brought up in the film set, basically, and then he breaks through to the real world. And on one level, I think we've all those of us in the global north, we've been brought up in this kind of brought up to be consumers, not citizens. So if we've been brought up to be consumers, which, let's face it is pretty much all of us, other than obviously indigenous peoples, for example, who have more connection to reality, i.e. the earth, the consumer society and the messages we're told, and we'll be happier if we have this stuff, we'll be happier if we buy this stuff, we'll be happy if we have more, we'll be happy if we be more, all this aspirational lifestyle. So much of it is just total and utter nonsense, isn't it? It doesn't make us happy. We can see that writ large through society. We have a pandemic of mental health issues, don't we? We have a pandemic of poor mental health, particularly among so many people, and particularly young people and teenage girls, for example. We just horrific mental health problems, and because we're societally selling them a complete lie, and this stuff doesn't make us happy. It doesn't even keep us safe in the long term. And what for me, it's about focusing on human needs. And I think maybe for some people, and again, I'm hesitating to say this because everyone's experience was different, and for many it was awful. But in some ways, for some people, some of the pandemic lockdowns reminded us of what was important. That
connection, friends,
absolutely,
nature.
Yeah, exactly. Being with people we love, having access to food when we needed it, having shelter, having
toilet paper was very important.
yeah. I mean, actual essentials, as opposed to the non-essentials that we've been told we need, which feed the corporations and the profit motive. And so much of what we're told that we need, if we think back, depending on how old listeners are, you think back to when you were little, or I grew up in the 70s, early 80s, we didn't have loads of this stuff, and actually we were fine. So I'm not people that say, oh, you're trying to put us back into caves. That couldn't be further from the truth. Because actually, I'm a pretty kind of data-based or evidence-based person, and there's when you actually look at indicators, I'm trying to remember the name of the indicator, it will come to me in a minute. There is good evidence that when you look at a fully sort of rounded indicator of human well-being, and you compare that with GDP, actually our actual human well-being has been flatlining since the kind of 60s, 70s. And as GDP has gone up, gross domestic product, and I would really, really super encourage people to read a book called Less is More by Jason Hickel, who is a wonderful academic and writer in the field of ecological anthropology and economics and degrowth, and actually, the vast majority of GDP growth goes to the top 1% in society. So all it's really done is exacerbate inequality. So yes, there's been a bit of trickle down, but the trickle down theory is just is nonsense.
It's outdated. I think.
It's complete nonsense. So I'm trying to come back to your question about. I think I am a strong believer in the need for managed degrowth. Which doesn't mean recession. It means a complete change in how we kind of configure our society. So
like circular economy, for example, supply chains that are circular.
Yeah. So circularity is obviously super important, as is, for example, things like moving to a 4-day week, or maybe even less. Because we hear demands. I don't know if you have it across Europe. I'm guessing there's a case. I mean, we certainly hear it in this country, we need to be more productive. Workers need to be more productive. But actually, I've seen some really interesting research that says in terms of energy and material throughput, which brings us back to reality, the real world of planetary boundaries, what we can actually afford planetarily is about a 2.5-day week, which we need to slow down. We just need to slow down a lot of things, and managed degrowth is about it's about growing certain parts of our society and economy. So growing care, growing education, growing agroforestry, and organic growing, and growing of community resilience, and degrowing parts of the economy that are just non-essential. So fast fashion would be a great example. We know that tons and tons of clothing is dumped on either waste dumps or dumped in developing countries or global south countries daily. So we've got more clothes than we could ever need. And I'm sure most of the listeners could go to their wardrobe right now and think, yeah, I don't wear 90% of that every day, so I probably don't ever need any clothes again. And I think that's what I did that nearly 3 years ago, that I really do not need to buy any new items of clothing anymore, so I haven't. And it's, we just stuff doesn't make us happy, and I think at our hearts we know that. And there is another world that is entirely possible, that has limitless compassion, limitless love, limitless collaboration, limitless care, limitless kindness. These are the things that actually make life really, really joyful and wonderful. Mm-hmm. And those things are not limited, and we can have unlimited growth of all of that: care, compassion, kindness, joy, fun, love, humor. There is no limit on those things, but there are planetary boundaries on the reality that we have to live within, and we've burst most of our planetary boundaries. So if people are not familiar with the notion of planetary boundaries, they are the physics, chemistry, biology, and ecology of the planet that tells us very clearly where the limits are, because we only have one Earth, and we're consuming nearly 2 Earths worth a year of resources at the moment, and that's set to increase because economic growth, which our people in power are so wedded to, they're desperate to get 3% year-on-year economic growth, if not more, but that means a doubling of the size of the economy in 20 years, every 20 years, but we don't double the Earth. So
how is that possible? Yeah.
It's school children know this is impossible, but somehow when we go into the working world, we accept that's what we're supposed to do, and we're supposed to feed the economy, and we exist to feed the economy. No. The economy is a subset of humanity and ecology, and it should be looking after us. So we need to redesign it. It needs to be rewired. The whole economic system needs to be rewired, so that it actually looks after all of us, not just the 1% or the 10%, but all of us within planetary boundaries in a fair and just way. And there are lots of thought leaders and examples of how we can move towards that, from donut economics to degrowth, steady state economy models, bioregional economy models. We're not short of the models, we're short of the political will and the power shifts, which kind of brings us full circle back to direct action and activism and citizens' assemblies and people power and all of these things. But I think that I totally understand that reaction that you've described, Karsten, because I feel there's almost like a grieving process, like a transition curve. I'm sure everyone, coaches are really familiar with all this stuff. And so we ought to be in a good position to support ourselves and other people through this, because there's a transition curve to go through to get to the point of accepting that we've been fed a load of lies, and that this life that we've been aspiring to, perhaps, or maybe even still aspire to, may really not be the right thing, and may not serve ourselves and serve our children, and in the long term, not even the long term, in the here and now, is going to lead to collapse. So coming to accept that can be quite painful. And I think for the more that people's sense of identity is hooked on their work self, their professional self, their wealth self, their material self, it's even more painful. With it, I totally believe that another world is possible, and there's a world in which we can have, universal basic services, universal basic income, shorter working weeks, freeing ourselves up to collaborate, to work on community resilience, which we're blooming well going to need, because so much negative, climate impacts are now locked in and inevitable. So we need to face that with love and compassion and open eyes, and get on and work together to collaborate internationally, nationally, and at local level to support our resilience in communities.
There's a few dozen questions that I have
know, sorry.
But actually, I think we circled that area, that topic, which is huge and vast and challenging. And I would like to go a little bit into your biography, just to understand, how did Zoe Cohen became the activist, the coach, the mother, the family person, that actually is so convinced of the case that she is, being taken by the police, being in courts. I'm not sure about being in prison, but at least, very, very fundamental things where normal people would say, wow, that's a bit too much for me. And let's maybe paint that picture how did that develop? And let's see, what we can make of that. So Zoe, talking about your family, how would you describe the family that you were born into, that you were raised? What were values that were important? What were things that kind of made an impact on your life?
Wow, that's a big question.
Easy question.
Oh heck. Well, lots of things. I genuinely think I'm a very ordinary person. I guess relative to the global south or global majority, I was obviously privileged to grow up and be brought up in the UK. That said, I didn't have a particularly privileged upbringing. We had a lot of money problems in my family when I was growing up. And I guess there's some key things that shaped all sorts of things. I mean, there's oh, hello, dog. It's nice to have we have a non-human, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
That's an on cue, actually, because I've right from being very little, very young. I think all very young children have a strong connection to the natural world and the non-human world. You see little ones playing with animals, playing with pets, and they don't really see or feel a boundary between humans and non-humans when they're little. And I've never really changed from that. I really, 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 really dislike anthropocentrism. We're just a species. We're so arrogant, and it freaks me out, the level of arrogance. When scientists discover that another species has got some characteristic that we've got, they're like shocked about it. Like, what the hell? How dare we be so arrogant that we think other species haven't got forms of communication or consciousness that are similar, different, or better than ours? How ridiculous. Right. Yeah. Just because they haven't got iPhones doesn't mean they're not beautiful, intelligent, incredible creatures. How ridiculous. Anyway, so lots of things, I guess. I mean, there's a myriad of chaos theory that impacts on us, isn't there? So being born in 1970 in the northwest of England, in pretty ordinary street, really. My dad was, his parents were Polish and Romanian Jewish immigrants who came across between the First and Second World War. And my mum's family was a mix of French and Welsh and English, and so there's all sorts of mix in this. So I think being a hybrid mix of all sorts of European background and Jewish and non-Jewish, kind of whole mix, a hybrid. I think that that had obviously all sorts of impacts on me, in terms of values, I guess a mix of my dad was pretty politically aware, and I wouldn't say he was massively politically active, but he was pretty politically aware, and was very was pretty academic, and he read a lot, and both my parents read a lot, were both well read, so he talk about politics and was pretty sort of politically engaged in his own mind, and would have debates at home and that kind of thing, and they both had really strong values, and my mum had a huge love of nature, which obviously I picked up on as well, and I guess there's also what you pick up from your wider surroundings societally and in the zeitgeist of the time, and there's also what you bring as your innate self, to a mix of that. So I have a love of absolute love of plants and animals, some sort of I don't know if it was innate, who knows, but some sort of inner appreciation of ecology and the web of life from a really young age. Quite a strong sense from around justice and feminism, women's rights, girls' rights, the importance of those, passion around I've always been passionate about equality and wanting to call out inequality from a young age. So yeah, lots of different things which just kind of stayed with me, I guess, and so much of that, some of that from my mum and dad, some of it from the broader zeitgeist, and I guess some impacts from just whatever the kernel of me is, whoever knows what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you moved on and you applied at Oxford and you got accepted, which is, I mean, one of the best universities in the United Kingdom. And you studied human science, not ecology, not biology. Why that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was super lucky to get the last year of full grants to university. Not after that, the loan system came in, and then of course latterly in recent years the having to pay tuition fees and all of that was. So I got the very last year of the full grant system to be able to not just have tuition fees paid, but have a grant, because otherwise I'm not sure I wouldn't have been able to go to university because we wouldn't have had the money to do that. So I'm conscious of being incredibly lucky with that. And yeah, my again, chaos theory does so many things, doesn't it? They're just the sort of ripples of chaotic, complex systems. That actually most of my university choices were to do ecology or environmental biology, because that's kind of where my heart very much was. I did biology, chemistry and geography at A level in senior school, and then through some like literally kind of semi-random things happening, I ended up applying for and becoming aware of human sciences as a course, and it did really appeal to me because it was so multidisciplinary, and I've always had a sort of brain that doesn't do silos. I don't, I like depth, but I like depth across a lot of areas, and I think I just have something that's a bit innately systemic in my way of thinking, and I don't like silos. I don't like narrow thinking. I like breadth and interconnectivity, and seeing the whole and seeing systemic connection and connecting lots of stories up and lots of dots up. So and human sciences was hugely broad in terms of what it covered, everything from demography, genetics, animal behavior, epidemiology, statistics, human ecology, anthropology, animal behavior. It was really, really broad, and such a great grounding, I guess, such a great grounding to have a sense of how the world really works, really. I think some enlightened people created it as a degree in Oxford back in, I think, the 70s, possibly late 60s, or if not early 70s, as a sort of answer to PPE, politics, philosophy, economics, which is kind of the classic degree that so many people do in Oxford and other similar universities, and then go on to be in powerful positions in politics and economics and business, and which is just feeding people the traditional economic model. And so human sciences was kind of the response of like everything else except PPE. It's like let's actually understand humans culturally, genetically, behaviorally, ecologically, how let's understand humanity in a much broader sense. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does, and many other questions too.
Sorry, that's not my.
No, that's fine. And then you moved on. There were some more studies, but then you spent a large time of your working life in the NHS, which is the National Health Service. And if I understood correctly, there was several stints. But you were. Is it fair to say that you were running, I'm not sure if hospital is the right term, but I think there were some mental health institutions. You were not on the kind of caring side or caregiving side or on the doctor side, but you were kind of on the management and administration side of things. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so out of university, I applied for and got a place on the graduate training scheme for the NHS, so the NHS management training scheme, of which there was thousands of applications in 50 places. It was really competitive, and I think it's still going, and I think it's still really competitive. And because I knew I didn't want to work in the traditional corporate sector. It's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to help companies make more profit and stuff. I knew back then, that I didn't want to do that. And I cared about inequality and public health, and so I wanted to go into the NHS, and I had a non-clinical background, so I wasn't a nurse or a doctor or anything like that, obviously, and I did work for some time in hospital organisations, but most of the time I was more drawn to, because of the way my brain works and takes the sort of big picture, interconnected, long-term perspectives, much more drawn to kind of the strategy and service commissioning and public health, where it's about tackling inequalities, it's about prevention, it's about thinking long-term, and thinking more systemically rather than treating the patients in front of you. Not that that isn't super important, and it is super important, and I dearly love the health service, and the NHS is an incredible institution in this country. But at the same time, I remember learning, I don't know, you might have this too, I'm sure we all have this, Karsten, that there's kind of key learnings or facts or things that strike us, and we remember years and years on. So I remember learning many years ago, probably 30 years ago, that at any one point in time, only 1% of the population are having contact with hospital services, but something like 70% of people in any 1 year will have contact with primary care. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to influence people's health status and well-being, you're going to do that through primary and community services. You're not going to do that through hospitals, which are really, dealing with people downstream when the problems have already happened. And this has been known for decades and decades and decades. It's been known for a long, long, long time, and we're still battling with it because the systems are set up to not prevent anything. Which brings us back to the bigger issues. Of the fact that the whole political economy drives illness and harm and death. Literally. So we have, the pharmaceutical companies and pharma complex, and the agricultural sector is, destroying our ecology by habitat destruction, chemical use, antibiotic use to feed us low-grade shit food, excuse my language, that makes us ill, that the pharma companies then make profit for our pension funds out of making us ill, because they then develop drugs for the fact that we've got diabetes, asthma, blah, 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 all the heart disease, high blood pressure, all the things that we've got because we've been fed the rubbish food by the system in order just to carry on. And it's all just like, but that makes money for making the rich richer and for pumping the pension funds to, it's just bonkers. It's bonkers, isn't it? It's totally bonkers. The more one zooms out, the more bonkers one can see it is. The whole, agricultural system, food system, the finance system, the military complex, all of it is bonkers.
Your biography.
It's bonkers.
There were 15 years in NHS where you just had these different roles, where you also came to realization, that system is bonkers partially, or is part of a bigger system that is bonkers. And then you made a shift. Many coaches at one point make a shift in their career. Can you walk us through what led you to this shift to say, now I leave that relative safety, maybe the prestige, and I do my own thing and I develop my own coaching practice?
Yeah. So I guess I noticed as the years went on, I got into a director position at a ridiculously young age. I was like 27. I was one of the youngest directors in the country at the time. Bonkers, again, a bonkers thing to happen, really. I wasn't really prepared for it in many ways, but enjoyed it and got a lot out of it in other ways. But lots of things happened. So I guess that I naturally had an affinity for coaching and mentoring people before I really knew what those things were. And even as on the graduate scheme in the NHS, I was supporting and mentoring people that I came into contact with to apply for it. I helped a guy who was in a sort of kind of dead end role, but had loads of potential to apply as a mature student, and he got on, and then had whatever career and things like that. So I was doing those sorts of things at a really young age, and so I guess I just kind of discovered that it's who I am, and it's just it's just expression of who I am, really. As time went on, my passion for spotting talent and ability and helping people make the most of that, and whatever that means, kind of outgrew my passion for the NHS. Not for the NHS really, but my passion to be in those roles, particularly when I think I'd been through, in 15 years, I've been through 5 major reorganisations, and it's a bit like, I don't know, when you keep bending something, an object, it gets brittle, and then you can bend it only so many times and then it snaps. And I think I just thought, and then there was another big reorganisation happening from central government, which I really didn't agree with. And I thought, I didn't agree with this reorganisation. I didn't think it was going in the right direction. I didn't feel in myself that I had the will to want to march myself and my people up that hill and part of the organisation, and do that willingly and lead and speak for it and do that authentically. And at the same time, there was the banking crisis, which I was sort of thinking, okay, this means that 18 months plus time austerity is going to hit, because that's what's going to happen, isn't it? And it was like a slow moving wall of water, like a slow moving tsunami. And I was like, hang on a minute, guys, we need to start talking about this, because the NHS and the public service is going to get hit by this. But I don't think we don't like to talk about difficult stuff, do we? It's like, that's why we're partly where we are with the climate and ecological crisis, because we don't like to acknowledge difficulty and talk about it. So anyway, all of the above was going on, and I think just prior to that, I had done my first formal coach training, which had kind of really opened my eyes and connected myself with myself, of like, okay, this is kind of who I am, and this is kind of what I do. I just want to do more of it. So I decided ultimately to leave a full-time permanent role, and just having started my practice really part-time, decided to go for it. And so I gave my notice in and walked away from a full-time permanent role, and some people thought I was crazy, but I probably was crazy in a way, I don't know. I haven't regretted it. I haven't regretted it since. I would say I don't really do I do? I try not to do regrets, but what I have regretted, I guess in some ways I've regretted doing some of the coaching that I've done with some of the organisations that I've done, given that I have joined, in recent years, I've joined the parts of me back up again about being much more concerted in behaving, aligning more of myself to my real self. So this kind of what I did early 2019 of kind of professionally coming out. I hope that doesn't offend anyone, because I genuinely mean it like a coming out process of saying, okay, this is the real me. This is I might show up on LinkedIn as a professional coach or whatever, but actually I'm someone who cares passionately about the climate and ecological crisis and the attending social justice crisis, and we need to step up. We can't keep on going with business as usual, pretending this is not happening. I mean, what the hell is going on here? Where were all the coaches when the planet warmed by 3 degrees is what I called it. So I kind of, if I have got a regret, I regret doing some of the work for some of the clients that I did. But then I guess coming from a wholly public service background for the first 18 years of my career, it also helped open my eyes to actually what other parts of the economy were doing. And whilst there's, there's good people everywhere, isn't there? There's a lot of good people trying to do what they think is good things at the time in a good way that they think is the right thing to do. At the end of the day, this bigger political economy is driving us to have totally unsustainable systems that are causing horrific externalities, as we call them, for many, many people on Earth, and etc.
So is it fair to say that this process is almost like becoming more you, or as you say, connecting the public self to your private self, like that this is becoming, less of a facade, less of a outside shell that you're showing to the world, and much more the Zoe that cares for the environment, talks about caring for the environment and for social justice and all of that, so that is becoming more integrated.
Yeah, I guess I mean, it's probably a bit of a cliched thing, isn't it? Maybe that's all of our life journeys, trying to integrate back with ourselves, coming home to ourselves, that maybe. I can see a bit of skepticism on your face, and I'd like to know more about that. But yeah, I think I'd had kept connection between the personal and professional parts of me, kept some connection, and so there was quite a strong connective thread. So that, hence wanting to work in the NHS, wanting to try to work against inequality and genuinely make a difference in public services and so on. I also did a brief. About 3.5 years, I worked at an organisation called the Audit Commission, which had an explicit role before this Conservative government abolished it, had an explicit role to show up and take action on variation and inequality, really, variation in public service and inequality of opportunity and so on. And I guess that there is a strong theme about inequity and inequality, which has always been a core thing for me. So I guess I've been reasonably true to a fair amount of my true self, but the part of me that felt utterly connected to the non-human world, and I guess might derogatorily call it the tree hugger. That wasn't expressed professionally. It was expressed personally outside work, but it wasn't expressed professionally. And let's face it, until relatively recently, anyone who is sort of green or eco, you just got taken,
stigmatized,
stigmatized or made fun of or belittled or whatever, and othered. You're a sandal wearing hippie, or you're this, or you're that, and it still happens. The media still do it now. If you're a green activist or something, currently they're calling people the eco mobs. What the hell is an eco mob? People who are just trying to call out the fact that we are killing the biosphere. That's not eco mobs. Anyway, so I guess that part of me, frustratingly, I had not expressed anywhere near as fully as I could. Well, certainly not in my professional life. I'd expressed it more fully in my personal life, but not as much as I wanted. And
maybe let's shed some light on the coaching part of your biography. So I think there's a joke in the coaching industry, like, what did coaches do during the financial crisis? They sent their invoices. What did coaches do during the climate crisis? They sent their invoices. So in other terms, coaches, on the one hand side, I think one of the déformations professionnelles is that coaches tend to think about purpose and meaning in life, calling, what would you do if you were not afraid, all that kind of stuff. But sometimes on a very individualistic way, like to say, I can help you get the next career step. I can help you save your marriage. I can help you prevent a burnout. So, which is all fair and all good. But on the other hand, it is something that is kind of on a nucleus, on a sample size of maybe one person to work with. And I think you have also gone through this process, probably found yourself working for some companies where you thought, do we need this company on this planet, right? Is it really helpful? Like all of us, I think, as coaches, we always have that kind of boundary. And then something happened in your life where you said, no more, or much less, very, very different. And I think it had to do with the death of your mom. So sorry if I'm putting that so together in a compact way. But can you make sense of that for us?
I will attempt to. There's quite a few different questions and there are different aspects in that. So yeah, I guess it's linked to this knocking down the walls between the different parts of us, isn't it? And trying to this. I kind of don't like the phrase when it sounds really arrogant, and I really don't mean it like this, but trying to live in one's truth, like, you know, if you actually try and align your behaviors to what you actually believe, it's probably the hardest thing in the world. And we're all hypocrites because the system we live in makes it incredibly hard to actually enact our values and beliefs in reality. Well, yeah, I think I'm in a phase of questioning myself a lot at the moment, Karsten, so forgive me if I'm just literally questioning myself live. I'm questioning myself.
I love that. All good.
A lot of things. But yeah, so I'm sure you and others listening know when we have a major thing and it happens in our life, bereavement is one of the most major things, isn't it, that can happen to us. And obviously losing one or both parents is massive. And I lost my dad when I was 28, which had big impacts on me then. And one of the many things my dad used to say, is I think is a Talmudic expression from his in Jewish upbringing and heritage and so on, was that there's no pockets in a shroud. So I
say it again. Sorry.
There's no pockets in a shroud. You know, the shroud being like a fabric or a dress or a cloak that you put on a dead body.
Oh yeah. So yeah, same saying in German. Yes.
Yeah. So you can't take it with you. You know, you can't take it with you. So I remember that from quite a young age, and so I'm sure that's had impacts on me, not being hugely focused on stuff, you know. I'm sure that's been one of the impacts on me. And then I was lucky enough to have one of the most amazing mums on earth, and cared for my mum when she got poorlier and poorlier before she died at the end of August in 2018. And as I said, mum was a significant part of why I had a deeply instilled love of nature and the non-human world. And the combination of caring for mum and grieving for her before she even died, because I was losing her in front of me, as it were, plus the evident climate breakdown happening in front of us. Though we had that, you know, a pretty big heat wave in 2018, and we had I think it was about 15 weeks with no rain in this country, or in this part where I live. We had a long time with no rain, and we have an allotment. We grow quite a lot of our own veg and fruit and stuff, and which I love, and is a huge, really massively important part of my personal well-being and resilience, is being able to get my hands in the soil and grow stuff and harvest it and eat it. And that summer was very striking in the heat and the lack of rain, and how hard it was to keep crops alive, even on a tiny scale, you know. And I'm totally aware that with the privileges of living in this country and having enough money to buy food, you know, that actually you're not dependent on wholly what you grow, but being someone who's feels connected to the soil and plants, and when you know that you have to artificially water stuff to keep it alive, then I, you know, was viscerally aware of what that means. If, you know, everything from bringing home the connection between the utter basics of, you know, we rely on the soil. We are completely dependent on soil. And how many people listening to this are thinking every day of our life depends on topsoil? And it does. Humanity depends on a few key things. Topsoil is one of them. Ocean health is another. We depend on, our very being depends on that. We come from the soil, we go back to the soil, as we know, but we need to remember it. We need to stay viscerally connected to that. I think it's absolutely vital. So that was a strong reminder of, having, and even just like I feel so ecologically so connected to my ecology at a very local level. So seeing the streams, not seeing the water levels in any streams and stuff just drying up, and at the same time knowing that actually you have to water your crops, otherwise they are going to die. But then if you take that water, you're taking it away from the rest of nature. And that in itself feels awful. It just feels awful. Anyway, so all of this stuff goes on in my overthinking, complex mind. Not that my mind's any more complex than anyone else's, it isn't. So this was going on whilst my mum was dying, and I was looking after her and still working. And then shortly after, very shortly after my mum died, the IPCC 1.5 degrees report came out. It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that came out in the autumn of 2018, that said, the headline, that it was all at the same time that Greta had just started, the schools started her striking, in terms, we have 12 years to save the planet. That was the headline. It's pretty erroneous in a few ways, which maybe we come on to, but yeah, so that was all happening at the same time, basically, and was a sense of I'd done lots of community activism with a small a, as in kind of the polite type, and done lots of volunteer work around sustainability for years, like thousands of hours of it, and a real kind of embodied sense of, okay, this has made absolutely no difference. Everything we've done hasn't been enough. We've all failed, and including me. We've all failed, and we all have to do different and more. This isn't enough. So then I discovered the Extinction Rebellion and non-violent direct action, and also started speaking out across my profession and calling stuff out, hopefully in a compassionate way, but also hopefully in a truthful way, about, we can't keep going as we are, people. We just can't do this. We have to speak out, we have to step up, and we have to change.
So we had a bit of a system outage. Let's try to get back to where we started. We were at the transition of you being in a coach role to realizing what was going on, the summer of drought, your mom passing away, and then kind of coming to a realization that you need to change something, coming from a small a activist to a big A activist.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report and learning about Extinction Rebellion both kind of played a part in that as well. In that, whilst I would thought of myself as someone who was kind of environmentally aware and reasonably well informed, I guess I had made the very naive error of trusting that world leaders would actually do something. Back when the Paris Agreement was signed, I remember I was aware the Paris Agreement. I remember when we heard in the news that it had been signed, I cried tears of joy and relief, thinking, thank goodness they're going to do something. And I naively trusted that they would. And of course, they have utterly failed, just like all the other COPs previously failed. And now we're at COP26, which is also failing. So that realization of that, they're really not coming to save us, are they? And also watching a talk by Dr. Gail Bradbrook, one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, which I watched in December 2018, which is the sort of core training and recruitment talk, if you want to call it that, which makes it sound like some sort of weird thing, but anyway, it isn't. It's called a talk called Heading for Extinction and What to Do About It, which is just a summary of the climate and ecological science and the social science around non-violent direct action and how it's got the potential to drive change and how you get involved in it, basically. So I watched that on YouTube in the December, and the combination of that and then doing lots of my own research made me realize that actually me and 99% of the rest of the population had no real idea about how serious this stuff was. Like, you know, I don't think I had a real appreciation of basic things like climate feedback loops and tipping points, and where that, how that can and is on the edge of taking us to a completely irreversible different state of climate for millennia to come. I had no deep understanding of that prior to that, and I think sadly, whilst there's much higher awareness around climate change, climate breakdown, etc., much higher awareness than there was. I think there's still a lot of gaps in awareness, media and education and so on around the real severity and the real irreversibility, and that, you know, just this notion of feedback loops and tipping points, like that people are bandying around in the conversations around COP. Oh, well, it's 2.8 degrees, or we can get down to 2.4, and maybe if they actually implement what they're saying, we might get to 1.8. The majority of the people talking about this, include the media and general public, I'm afraid, I really don't think they have any understanding of what that really means. This is all non-linear. You know, we humans pretend like the world is linear, like the shelving units I can see behind your head and the shelving unit shelves, you know, we think the world is linear, like humans make it into, we manufacture linear things, yeah? We think life is linear. No complex systems are linear. They're all non-linear, and it's all interconnected games of Jenga. You know, you take the pieces out and then it gets wobbly, and eventually you take one last piece out and the whole thing collapses into a new stable state, which is all the pieces on the floor. That's the new stable state, and that's what the Earth systems do. That, you know, you push them and push them and push them, and they have a credible ability to have like a self-regulating, and then they start wobbling, and the wobbles get bigger, and then it flips into a new stable state. It's like, yeah, so we're seeing that all over the planet. We're seeing the wobbles of that. It's a bit like when you, we've got the jet stream. The jet stream is wobbling all over the place because having a stable jet stream relies on a temperature differential between the poles and the equator. And that temperature differential is breaking down because the poles are warming at 3 or 4 times faster than the average global heating, and we've had these ridiculous high temperatures in the Arctic. You know, we've had, what is it, 38 degrees C or something we've had in the Arctic. I mean, these crazy situations, and obviously the Arctic ice is melting at historic rates, and we're predicted to have Arctic ice-free summers by 2034 potentially, which means that we'll get into even more abrupt climate change and climate breakdown. I shouldn't use the phrase climate change, it's far too innocuous. But, you know, we are completely out of predictable safe climate that we've had for the 12,000 years that humanity's developed and developed civilization, as we call it. We're completely out of that. And yeah, these stable systems are wobbling and flickering, and those wobbles and flickers are telling us that it's like the Jenga tower. You know, you don't have to do too much more to it, and it'll flip into its new state, basically. And you know, everything's connected. These are all really complex systems, and they're non-linear, and there's still far too little awareness of all of this, Karsten, and we just bandy these numbers around like 1.5, 1.8, 2, and it all sounds logical, rational, quantifiable, linear, and it's it's scientifically based as much as the science is there, which is huge amounts of earth science now. There's masses and masses of it. But we know it's non-linear. We know a number of these tipping points across Earth are already active. There's already evidence to show that, the Jenga towers are wobbling. And there's so much that is missed out of the communications by governments, media, education institutions, etc. We just need to go to a whole nother level of understanding about this stuff really quickly.
So I think we've covered a broad array of different topics in your life and what you're passionate about and what we all should be passionate about. Now, in coaching, we know there's two basic motivations. There's away from and there's towards, right? And I think there's a very strong away from motivation, what we want to try to avoid. The towards, I think that's harder to grasp, right? The people assemblies, the global assemblies, that makes sense, but doesn't sound like a very speedy process either, right? So where do you get your positivity or optimism from? I mean, just that, is it just the away from, or what are you striving towards?
Thank you. I guess it gets battered, being really honest, it gets very battered very regularly. And at the same time, I'm a pretty stubborn person.
Really?
Yeah, I'm a pretty stubborn person.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, and I'm sure some of that is ridiculously naive. Think, there's probably some ridiculous, grandiose arrogance in there. Who the hell am I to think I can do X, Y, Z? And I don't think, none of us can do much on our own, can we? But there is, the famous quote, never doubt a small group of people can change the world, because it's the only thing that ever has. It is one of my favorite quotes, and it is indeed true, isn't it? Because small groups of people start waves, start patterns, start movements. Like Extinction Rebellion, for example, was hundreds of thousands of people across 70 countries, and started by a dozen people in the UK. 3-4 years ago. So it's like, and of course there's loads of other examples of incredible movements around the world, and so I guess I go towards or stay stubborn to the belief that another world is possible. It's really hard to see it sometimes, but it is possible, because at least conceptually it's possible, because we haven't, this system that we're in is, it's so new, it's so in not in my geological time, but in human history, it's very, it's like the last half hour, in human history, if you think about it. So it doesn't have to be like this. And I've been a social constructivist as long as I can remember what it, as long as when I first knew what it meant. And it's like, there is no such thing as the economy. You can't pick up half a pound of, a kilogram of economy. You can pick up half a kilogram of soil, and what it has meaning, and it has. But so we can change. The system can change. It's not immutable. I think I try and hold on to that. And there are many movements, thinkers, writers, doers who are working away for a different world. So I guess it's about holding on to that and I think COVID is, the sort of isolation of COVID has kind of made a lot of things feel harder, because you can feel more atomized, more isolated, when actually, there are millions of people working around the world, from incredible Indigenous people and groups in struggling in many global South countries, through to Sunrise Movement in the States, Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion in Chile, Britain, the Green New Deal movements. There's loads and loads of different movements who and degrowth movement, etc., etc. There are just not enough of us yet, and I think there aren't enough people who are prepared to take more risk. I think we need to kind of calibrate our risk taking, in that we are now in a situation where ecologies are collapsing in parts of the world, that and I wish we could do several more podcasts on some of this, to be honest, Karsten, but for example, there is a tipping point in the oceans, and we mustn't forget the oceans are 7/10 of the earth, but we never talk about them 7/10 of the time, and we probably really should, frankly, because they're 7/10 of the surface of the earth, and without healthy oceans we are gone. And there is an absolute chemical tipping point for most life in the oceans, and that's a pH of 7.95. So oceans are acidifying and have been acidifying since I think about the 50s or 60s, I think, but certainly in the last 30 years they've been acidifying more and more. And so ocean pH has been falling, and it's when it gets to 7.95, animals, creatures with backbones, creatures with shells will dissolve. They can't live, and that will fundamentally we'll lose most life in the ocean, and we've already lost 50% of all marine life. And healthy oceans create I think half or more of our oxygen on Earth that we breathe. Again, most of us don't realize that, and a lot of food for billions of people, and also healthy oceans sequester huge amounts of carbon. So there's all these things, we just there are other ways to live. We don't have to, it doesn't have to be like this. And there are, if we look to the edges of change, we know that as coaching, we can look to the edges. We don't look in the middle, we look at the edges. And there are edges of people doing incredible things. There's just not enough of us yet, and it's not moving fast enough.
So spreading the word is one of the key things to get people inspired to do something about it.
It's absolutely vital, yeah, and I think seeing through the myths that we've been told about how the world works, and how we have to have, we basically have to feed the economy when actually the economy needs to feed us. That's kind of one of the first steps, I think, isn't it? See through this, see it for what it is, and then work from the basis of how the world really works, which is complex systems, and that justice has to be at the heart of that, because 74% of people on Earth exist on less than $10 a day, and they're suffering first and of course least of all of these, colonially driven consequences that we're now experiencing. So there's a lot to fight peacefully for.
Absolutely. No question about that. Last question from my side, which would be the standard question in any coaching conversation. Anything I haven't asked you yet that would be important?
I'm sitting there thinking, my God, Karsten, you probably don't want to ask me anything else. I don't know about what, I think you've asked me lots of amazing questions, and thank you. Maybe there's something about what next, but kind of where next.
That's a great question, Zoe. So what next?
Yeah, what next, where next? Well, as I think because we've talked before, but I and 6 other women face a 2-week jury trial next November, so in a year's time, for carefully, peacefully, non-violently breaking some of the windows of Barclays headquarters in Canary Wharf in London to call out their funding of fossil fuels. They're the worst fossil fuel funder in Europe, and they've spent invested, in inverted commas, 144 billion on fossil fuels since the Paris Agreement, knowingly causing death and destruction. So we face a jury trial next November in London for 2 weeks, and we potentially face prison for that. So that is one of the what next for me, is with my colleagues, doing our damnedest to defend ourselves in that jury trial, so that hopefully justice emerges and that we're found not guilty, because what's really on trial is the behaviour of the banks and the political economy. And I guess more of what next is doing in my own partial and imperfect way, trying to find a way through, find a way through the truth that change happens through a complex ecology of change. There is no one answer. And I notice if I feel like I'm drawn to this is the one thing that will make the difference. There is no one thing.
Mm-hmm.
There is no one thing. But we need massive shifts on so many fronts. We need way more truth telling. We need lots more direct action, peaceful, non-violent direct action. We need lots more work in solidarity within communities across the world. We need better democracy, transparent democracy. We need working on community resilience. We need to work on lots and lots of fronts. So I guess my next steps is holding and working through the consequences of the actions I've already taken, no doubt taking some more actions, and asking myself those continual questions of what is mine to do amongst all of that. I think it's a never-ending question. I don't think it's not going to come to an end. It's always going to be a shifting and question and answer dialogue in me of what is mine to do in all of this. And I hope that other people will maybe ask themselves that question if they're listening to this, and what is mine to do? And not just what is mine to do, but what is the most that I can do? And that I can look back and think I did everything I could for this complex system to shift in directions that can be more hopeful for everyone and all the non-human species on Earth, and we can save what we can in as just a way as possible.
I think that's a very powerful closing statement for this podcast, and I have the strong feeling that there will be a part 2 because I'm sure that we covered only 10% of what needs to be covered here, Zoe. So thank you so much for taking us on a journey through your brain, your heart, your life story, your actions. Very impressive, very humbling. Thank you so much, Zoe.
Thank you, Karsten. Thank you for the time. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And what have you learned, Karsten?
That was Zoe Cohen. Talking to her always leaves me a bit delusioned, but also it feels very true. And it feels like deep inside, actually, if we are honest to ourselves, or at least I feel, if I'm honest to myself, I know that I would agree with most of it, with the analysis. It's just that it's becoming so big that one can feel overwhelmed. And I think the art is how to take that all in, how to acknowledge it without getting frustrated, without getting overwhelmed, without getting depressed at the end of the day. Because, as she said, there is a bit of a grievance process going on with this. And how can you remain positive in the face of all the things that are not going well, that are not going in the right direction? And how can we become or maintain a certain constructive attitude in building a future, a form of capitalism that is more sustainable, a form of economics where all parts of mankind can equally kind of participate and contribute? How is that possible, and what are steps towards that? I think that is the big question. And for now, let's leave us here and share your thoughts with me. I would love to hear what you think. Drop me a line at karsten.drath@leadershipchoices.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, drop me a note. Please follow us on iTunes or on all the other podcast platforms where you're listening, or YouTube. And so looking forward to stay in touch, looking forward to your thoughts. Stay well, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
This was an episode of Leaders Talk, the interview podcast portraying leaders who are committed to better leadership, better organizations, and a better world, powered by Leadership Choices. If you want to give us feedback, please send an email to leaderstalk@leadership-choices.com. Thank you for listening.